Hey everyone, and welcome back to Malaysia in Focus, where we break down the stories shaping our nation. For the last 3 years, the big word from the government has been stability. But as we look ahead to 2026, just being stable, well, it's not going to cut it anymore. Because behind all the headlines, there's a huge question Malaysia has to answer. Is it finally ready to make the really, really tough choices for its future?
So let's get right into it. This quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures this big shift that's happening. Think about it. After years of just trying to recover from the pandemic and, keep the economy afloat, 2026 is shaping up to be the ultimate prove-it year for the government. All those big, difficult, transformative ideas they've been talking about, this is the year they have to actually happen. The easier part is done. Now comes the hard part.
All right, so here's the game plan for today. First, we'll unpack why 2026 is such a do-or-die year. Then, we're diving deep into the massive economic plan that's at the center of everything. After that, we'll look at the huge attempt to rewire our country's core institutions. And then, oh boy, we are tackling the explosive issue of pensions. We'll also get into the urgent demands coming from Sabah and Sarawak before we wrap it all up and ask the big question. Is 2026 the final test?
Okay. So for the past few years, the main job was just steering the ship through some very stormy seas, right? Stabilizing the economy, dealing with the rising cost of living. But now, the focus is totally shifting. It's not about just treading water anymore, it's about actually implementing those deep, long-term reforms under the Madani framework. The time for talking is pretty much over. 2026 is all about action. Now, at the heart of this big shift are two huge documents, Budget 2026 and the 13th Malaysia Plan. You can think of these as the blueprint for where the country is headed for the next 5 years. And it's not just about numbers and charts. The whole idea is that it's people-centric. So what does that really mean? Well, in simple terms, it means focusing on stuff like creating better jobs, making healthcare better, and giving everyone a real shot at moving up in life. So when you look at the numbers, you see this really interesting balancing act. On one hand, you've got big ambitions, like steady economic growth and trying to collect a record amount of revenue. But on the other hand, you see some caution, like trying to shrink the budget deficit. But look at that last line. Around 15 billion ringgit is still set aside for targeted aid. That tells you that even with all these big economic goals, helping the react directly is still a top priority.
And a massive piece of this whole economic puzzle comes down to this one number, 47 million. That is the target for how many tourists they want to bring in for Visit Malaysia 2026. I mean, they're putting over 700 million ringgit into this. So this is not just some catchy campaign. It's a core part of the entire growth strategy for the year. It's a huge bet that our tourism industry is going to come roaring back.
Okay, so it's really important to get this. Budget 2026 is just the engine. The car itself, that's the new 5-year plan, the 13MP. And man, is it ambitious. It wants to completely change our economy by boosting something called economic complexity. Now, what on earth is that? Well, think of it this way. Instead of just making basic stuff, the goal is to move towards making more advanced, high-value things, like microchips or high-tech software. It's about working smarter, not just harder.
But here's the thing. You can't build a world-class economy on a shaky foundation. You just can't. You won't attract those big investments if people think your systems are corrupt or just don't work well. And that brings us to something maybe even more important than the economy, the plan to rewire Malaysia's core institutions. The goal here is pretty simple. Build systems that people can actually trust.
And just look at the schedule. The sheer number of huge reform bills planned for 2026 is kind of wild. We're not talking about small changes here. This is a total overhaul, covering everything from creating a national ombudsman and a Freedom of Information Act to finally sorting out political funding and, yes, separating the Attorney General from the public prosecutor.
So, what does this actually mean for you and me? Let's take the Ombudsman. In plain English, this is going to be a powerful, independent office where you can lodge a formal complaint if a government agency messes up or treats you badly, and actually expect something to be done about it. It's designed to give the average person a real weapon to hold the system accountable.
And this next one, this shows you why this stuff is so important. Right now, the same person who is the government's top lawyer is also the person who decides who gets charged with a crime. You can see the problem, right? It's like the referee is also coaching one of the teams. Separating these two jobs is absolutely critical to remove any hint of political influence from prosecutions. It's probably one of the biggest things we need to do to restore faith in our justice system.
If this breakdown is giving you a clearer picture of what's at stake, hit that like button and subscribe so you'll always stay ahead on Malaysia's biggest issues.
Okay, let's talk about what is, without a doubt, the most controversial, most politically dangerous reform on the entire list, getting rid of the civil service pension for all new government hires. Now, the government is selling this as a bitter pill, something painful we have to swallow now for the country's long-term financial health. But let's be real, this is a massive political gamble.
So let's break down the change. The old pension system, it's a guarantee. You work your whole life for the government and you get a steady income for life when you retire. Simple. The new system for future hires scraps that completely. It moves them over to the EPF just like people in the private sector. Now this is super important. This does not affect anyone already working in the civil service, but for new people, their retirement depends on what they save, not a government guarantee.
And of course, the backlash was instant. QPAX, the big civil service union, brought up a really good point. They're basically saying, hey, with the current low salaries, how can we expect people to save enough in EPF for a decent retirement? The fear is that this will make a career in the government way less attractive, which could hurt the quality of our public services down the line.
But then, you have the government side of the story, and it all comes down to this absolutely staggering number. If we do nothing, the cost of paying out these pensions is expected to hit 120 billion ringgit every single year by 2040. To give you some perspective, that is a huge chunk of the entire country's budget. For the government, this isn't a choice, it's a ticking time bomb.
And the Prime Minister himself put it in the most serious terms possible. He's essentially saying, look, this is a painful choice, but we have to make it now to stop a disaster later, a disaster that could bankrupt the country and leave our kids and grandkids with a massive mess to clean up. It's a classic dilemma. Take a huge political hit now for the promise of a more stable future.
All right, so while all of these huge national issues are boiling over, there's another high-stakes debate that's getting louder and louder, the pressure from East Malaysia. And this is not a new thing at all. This goes all the way back to the very formation of Malaysia, to the promises that were made in the Malaysia Agreement of 1963, or MA63.
Now, the big demand you hear about today often comes down to this one question. Leaders in Sabah and Sarawak are pushing for their states to hold 1/3, or about 35% of all the seats in parliament. So why that number? What's so special about 1/3? Well, it's about a lot more than just numbers. It's about power, and most of all, it's about protection.
This chart here makes it crystal clear. Right now, Sabah and Sarawak together have about a quarter of the seats in parliament. The demand is to bring that back up to the 35% level, which they say was the original understanding. That 10% gap you see, it's everything. To them, it's a constitutional safety switch. It's the power to block any changes to the Constitution that they feel might hurt their rights.
You know, maybe the best way to understand the emotion here is through this family affair analogy. Think of MA63 like a marriage contract between three equal partners, Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak. For a long time now, the partners from Borneo have felt like the terms of that sacred marriage contract were changed without their agreement. So this demand isn't just politics. It's about trying to restore the original balance in the Malaysian family.
So, let's bring this all together. You can see now why 2026 is shaping up to be such a pressure cooker, right? You've got a brand new economic vision, a massive project to fix our institutions, a huge gamble on pension reform, and these intense historical demands from East Malaysia, all hitting at the exact same time? It really does feel like our nation is standing at a major crossroads.
Thanks for watching. Join thousands of Malaysians who want clarity, not confusion. Tap like, hit subscribe, and let's keep making sense of these complex issues together.
And all of this leaves us with one final crucial question. Any one of these reforms would be incredibly hard to pull off on its own. Trying to do them all in 1 year? That's a monumental challenge. The government is betting that the long-term gain for Malaysia will be worth all the short-term political pain. But will that bet pay off? Or is the political price of these tough choices just too high to pay? We'll have to wait and see.